Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Let's Talk Tenkara podcast. I am joined today by Nathan Sutherland with Wasatch Tenkara Rods. Nathan, how are you today?
I'm awesome, man. Always am.
Good, I'm glad to hear it. Well, thank you for meeting with me on last minute notice here. I
Of
do
course.
appreciate it.
My
Um,
pleasure.
Today, we're going to take a little bit different approach than we have in the past with some episodes. For those of you that have listened, a lot of the episodes that we hit are like talking about specific states and fishing or talking about different people's journeys in Tenkara. Nathan, you and I are both fishing guides. We've both got quite a bit of skin in the game and I fished with you before, and we have very similar fishing style. So,
hmm
kind of the approach that we wanted to take getting started today is more of just a Q&A. Uh, get your opinion. I'll give some feedback where I feel it's necessary or where you want some feedback as well. But
hmm
uh, we're going to get started with just a list of questions that I've put together. Some of them are off of forums online that I've seen that people had Tenkara questions, some different Facebook groups. I reached out to you and got a couple questions that you've been asked previously, as well as a couple other people I know that Tenkara fish, and just a lot of the most common questions I feel like people get when Tenkara is brought up.
hmm
The first one is, do you think Tenkara is better suited for different waters other than small creeks?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I just had a little bit to start. So
Yeah, absolutely.
my biggest thing with Tenkara is I fly fished Western. First time I was 12 years old in the Boy Scouts, and I did it all the way through. I went to West Point, and I was on the fly fishing team there. And then when I discovered Tenkara, I went, wait a minute, this is simple. This is what I like. So all of these questions that I kind of answer and that we talk about, to preface it is, if you're making it too complicated, in my opinion, you're doing it wrong. And that's really with any, certainly any hobby, you can obviously get in way too deep and too complicated. But I think Tenkara specifically is one where it was designed for simplicity. It's what happened 2,000 years ago in small villages in Japan. It was, how do I go get food? So before, I'll jump into the question, but just
Yeah,
every answer I give for the listeners, that's just my take. But it's also, I kind of fish a very simple way. And so you might not get the in-depth, like, oh, well, I was wanting to know how to fish, what fly to use for this specific river on this specific day at this specific time. Well, I'm not going to tell you that because I fish simply. But so anyway, I guess the question was, is it for small streams or can it be used elsewhere? Or
yeah,
I guess, okay. Yes, I mean, obviously my style of fishing is small mountain streams. That's what I love. If you could put me on the green, I'd love it, but I would probably be happier on a small stream in the Uintas where I don't see anybody. I know I'd be happier. That being said, especially at WTR, but there are a few other companies where we're making rods for every type of fisher. We have saltwater rods for the people going on shore fishing. People are using them off of bridges in the ocean. I take little kids to neighborhood ponds, and you can slay bluegill. And well, it's not trout. It's all right. If you catch 100 bluegill in a day, you have a really fun time. And some of those bluegill fight. Um, I do think, is it probably better suited? Is it the best tool for the job when you're fishing small streams? Yes. Does Tenkara suffer a little bit when you get into lakes, ponds, massive rivers? My answer would be it can. It definitely takes a little more skill and knowledge to fish some of those bigger bodies than just getting your Tenkara rod and going to a small stream. But I don't think there's any limitation, so to speak. I've caught 22-inch tigers in lakes in the Uintas with a 12-foot rod. So
yeah, I would agree with that. I do think as you get into lakes and things like that, there might be a little bit more of a skill base needed than just jumping in a small stream where, sight fishing is an option or,
exactly, and those small streams, the fish are hungry. They're gonna hit it. You
mhm,
can pretty much throw any fly at a small stream, and I think there's a question on what fly choice. We can talk
yeah,
about that more, but yeah, like you said, the skill changes when you're fishing. Like I fished the Yellowstone and the Gallatin last month, and I got a few hits on the Yellowstone, It was a massive river. It's not something I'm used to. I personally don't have the skills to fish a river that big. I don't think Tenkara was what was limiting me. I think it's just I didn't know how to fish that river, and I'd never done something like that before. So
No, and that the skill set definitely plays a big part of it. You're not alone in thinking that, and I think most of the listeners would agree that it's the same with fly fishing. A river takes a different skill set than a lake does. You're not going to fish the same flies all the time on a lake that you're fishing on a river. So there's just that different variable that you're looking at, and like I said, different skill set. But we'll move on to the next question here. If you are fishing Tenkara in a small creek, what size of rod, line, what type of line, and length setup are you usually using?
yeah, it's a great question. It's definitely one we get a lot with selling rods and guiding as well. The way I kind of look at it is when I'm fishing a creek that I can step across up to maybe about 8 feet or so, 8-10 feet wide, I'm fishing. I'll take the Baby Rodzilla or the Quattro now, or the Sharpshooter. Now, if you're looking at different brands, say you're not with WTR, which is totally cool. All rods, all the companies are awesome. That's kind of your 6 to like 8.5, 9 foot range, sort of maximum. And the reason I do that is because basically overhead for the most part, but also in those small streams, you have lots of pools and lots of seams. There's so much terrain that you can see that you have the ability with an 8-foot rod to cast so many different drifts. If you're moving to a 12-foot rod, could you do it? Yes. Would it just cause more issues with length? Yes. And you'd also be spooking the fish when you put that rod over the river that you don't really need to spook. I jump to like medium rivers. So for the viewers in Utah, Ogden River, Weber River, Provo, I consider kind of medium to large. And that's sort of my 9 to 13 feet. Lakes and anything else, I go above that in length. So that's how I choose the rod. From there, it's also just action and sort of its ability to control fish. So, you can look at I'll go back to WTR just because I own half of WTR, but if you look at our Sharpshooter, that was our first foray into small rods, and it's a very stiff, very strong rod. Can you fish stream in the Uintas? Absolutely. Do you need to go buy another rod? Because that's when you have no. But that rod also can control steelhead. And so what you have is, you say, well, why would you be using that sort of rod on steelhead? You have guys fishing the very headwaters of the run where the streams are 8 feet wide, but they're catching 12-pound fish. So you sort of choose your length, and then you kind of decide what fish you're going to be catching. Are you going to be catching 6 to 8 inch fish, 10 to 12, 20 plus? That's how you determine sort of the strength of rod. There's a lot we could get into that, but really action and then company. Dragon Tail makes 6-4 actions that are a little bit looser than some of our 6-4 actions. And Dragon Tail, I would say I would use for pretty much any river in Utah, I think would be fine. Make great rods. Line length. So my belief is plus or minus 2 feet for your whole setup. And the reason I say that, and I know, and I'd like to get your feedback too in a minute, but the reason I say that is you can put a shorter line and you can dap. When you do that, you're putting the rod in front over the fish. You're spooking the fish. So you've just gotten rid of some of the benefits of Tenkara. You can put a longer line, and people say, well, I can cast a 40-foot line with my Tenkara rod. And that's totally true. You can do it. But then you have to hand line to get that fish in. And when you're hand lining, I always say you're saying screw you to the rod maker. Because the weakest point of any setup is going to be your tippet to line connection. And that's where you're always going to snap. You might snap at the hook, but I find typically it's that tippet to line connection. Or say you had an air knot in your tippet. And so if you go to hand line, you're going to break it there because that might only be 1 pound, 2 pounds after you've tied your knot. Whereas you could catch a 3-pound fish on that same knot by utilizing the rod and its bend and its ability to reduce energy. So that's why I don't ever go more than 2 feet. plus or minus 2, I think, is kind of the sweet spot. Typically, I start with +2, and after 3 or 4 days of fishing and cutting tippet or retying on, I realize I'm -2, and I fix my setup. And that's, again, simplicity. I don't really get to a river and go, okay, is my line the length of my rod? Nope, let me change it. I just fish. And if I notice that it's getting a little short, I'm not really liking my cast, I'll put a new line on. So, and then type of line, I don't fish furled lines. I started with it. I don't like them. I know a lot of people who do. To me, the level line just it's again the simplicity aspect. I can cut it. I keep a roll on a little foam disc of extra level line. I can add some if I need to. If it gets really knotted up, I just take it off the Lillian and put a new line on. Does it affect the cast? Does it cast as well? No, not quite as well. But it still casts decently well. It's also invisible, and I feel like it doesn't really get caught in cross currents as much. And so if you're not high sticking as well, or let's say you're in an area where you're really casting up underneath that rock and you can't raise it without interrupting the natural drift, that level line's not going to pull the fly as much as a furled will. So I don't really fish furled, but
Yeah, no, going back to line length, I agree. Plus or minus 2 feet is generally what I run. I generally start out with all of my lines, my level line being cut the same length as my rod, and then 2 to 3 feet of tippet, depending on where I'm fishing, what type of fly I'm fishing. It's in the summer, generally closer to 2 feet, and I'm throwing dry flies in the summer. In the winter, when I'm nymphing, I'll throw closer to 3 feet on. That way I've got some room that I can play with as far as depth and things like that. But then onto what type of line. Level line is my preference. If it's too windy for level line, I prefer a PVC floating line over furled line. But I mean, other than that, I think we're pretty much in the same opinion on everything there.
Yeah, and for the listeners, so Brent and I went out to Small Creek, and I mean, it was get out of the car, essentially start walking and fishing. I've taken a lot of people out, and I'm sure you have, who, when you come from the Western fly world, there's you pretty, for the most part, unless you have a rooftop carrier, you're pretty much having to set up your rod. So there's a lot of thought that goes into that. Oh, should I be fishing a 9-foot leader or 7-foot leader today, or because you have to set it up. So I feel like you almost are forced to think a little more. That might not be a bad thing, but like you said, I cut my level line the length of my rod. Sometimes I can fish that level line for 6 weeks, and I go pretty often, 3-4 times a week. Sometimes I'm losing tippet a lot, and I fish it for 2 weeks, and I go, oh, this line's only 4 feet long now. What happened here? And I hurry and tie a new one on. But I think because it's so easy to get out, people are trying to figure out what they need to do. And in reality, you're not going to catch fish if you're not fishing. Just go fish. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember when we went out to that stream, we were walking to the stream and I was measuring out my level line and stuff, setting up my rod as we were walking. Like, there's nothing to it. And I mean, I cut my level line to length. I hooked up my tippet and everything. When we got down to the water, I hooked my line on the rod and we were ready to go.
Yeah, it was simple, easy. That's the big thing that I'll keep going back to, is simplicity. You should always have your rod with you. If it's wrapped up with, I like the inline line holders. They give a little bit more of a memory, especially using level line. But I don't even straighten my lines, for instance. I just fish. And sometimes it does, if it's windy, it's like, oh, I probably should straighten this line out, pull it a little bit, get the kinks out. Usually your first fish on, it's going to work those kinks out, work the memory out, and you're fine. So yeah, I'll keep going back to the simplicity part, because that's what I love. So
absolutely. All right, so the next question we've got here, are you in waders or are you fishing from shore?
Yeah, so I know we talked, last night, you and I. In Utah, there's almost no place you can fish from shore. Provo, Weber a little bit, lakes obviously, but for the most part, our streams in Utah are pretty overgrown. There's shrubbery right up to the edges, trees to the edges. I also just prefer to hop in a river. I really love walking a river. Um, I think that you have the ability to really move around and see the seams, see those pockets better. Whereas when you're on the shore, you're kind of looking at more of like a 45-degree view out from you. You're in the river, you're looking all the way up, and you're seeing, okay, I'm going to fish that seam, then I'm going to move kind of across the river to that pocket, and I'm going to hit this, or you can fish with two people side by side and just move up a river, which is a really fun thing, something I love to do. Fishing small streams like we did, where you just kind of hand off holes, like, okay, you got this hole, you got this seam. Great. It's your turn, Nathan. Oh, your turn, Brendan. As far as waders, I think people get hung up on waders a lot. I mean, I use waders probably from, let's see, I got in the river last night. It was a little cold, but I'll probably not put on my waders till mid-October. And then I usually put them away for this season kind of mid-April maybe. I love to wet wade. Your feet are going to get cold. You're going to fall in, but it's just, to me, nice to feel that river. And again, it's that simplicity aspect. I put on my Crocs, have my shorts, my sun hoodie, and I'm out. Some people are going to like the ability, the traction wading boots give. They like to be able to stay dry, or maybe they're doing it during lunch at work. I think all the options are great. Shore fishing, though, is the one that I really almost never do. So
Yeah, and going back to like you said earlier, when you're fishing in Utah, there's not a lot of places that you can shore fish outside of reservoirs and things like that. But I'm right there with you as far as wet wading. I do have a pair of nylon socks or neoprene, socks that I'll wear if the water gets a little chilly here, September, October, early spring. But unless I'm in a watershed or it's winter, I pretty much don't touch waders.
Yeah, the watershed's a good point. Don't go up the cottonwoods. You can actually get 6 months in jail. It's punishable by jail time, in theory. Yeah. I don't know what game warden would do it, but now that I've said it, if they see this post and they catch me, I probably am going to jail. So I'll be wearing waders in the cottonwoods. But yeah, watersheds, and if it's really cold, other than that, and I don't even have chest waders anymore. I've totally ditched chest waders. I just have hip waders. I have the Patagonia guide waders. They're pants. They're great. You can throw them on. They're a little expensive, but their warranty is amazing. But again, I find like in the winter, typically 2-year streams are lower. So the time that I would be using waders, I'm never going. Honestly, I never go above my hips anyway. But
yeah,
the time I would be using waders, your Ogden's flowing at 20, Weaver's flowing at like 60 to 80. All of those rivers are 2 feet deep, where you're going to be walking 2-3 feet deep maximum. So
yeah, the only time last year, because I still have a pair of chest waders, and they're my insulated pair, so I wear those in the winter. But I was very thankful I had those as I went up Mill Creek last year and was wading through waist deep of snow getting to and from the stream.
That is a good point. Yeah, getting through the snow is. Last year I ski tour, so last year we did a ski touring fishing trip, and so we just had our skis on and we were walking. I guess we were shore fishing at that point, but all the brush was compacted, so we were just walking along the shore casting and having a grand old time.
That's awesome.
But
all right, so next question: how much time are you exploring up or downstream versus going to specific spots that you know are good?
Yeah, so kind of my style of fishing. I mean, I definitely have my favorite sections of river. If we're talking the Ogden, there's a section in the canyon I love to hop in, and I also have kind of sections of rivers I go to frequently where I know how much time. So know, hey, if I hop in here and I only have an hour and a half to fish, I'll be able to get out. Because there are definitely times in a lot of streams where you're in it and you just can't get out until you see an opening. As far as like exploring up and down, I mean, I explore a lot. I try to fish. I mean, my goal would be to fish every stream in Utah that's public land. I've fished probably every stream north of American Fork, pretty close to at least, and a lot in some really weird places. But yeah, I don't really just go post up on a hole that I know I'm going to catch a fish. Tonight, or this weekend, I'm going scouting for deer. I happen to look and see that there's some blue lines where I'm going to be, so I'm going to bring my rods. No idea what to expect. But when I get in a river, it's always walking up. So, there are definitely techniques to fish downstream. I don't use them. I don't even practice them because you're spooking fish. And so you spook a fish. I know that's one of the next questions, but how I'll just jump into that question. How long do I think you can wait? It's all across the board. 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. I say, to be honest, I've never truly like spooked a fish and just waited long enough to tell. But I have definitely had times where I spook a fish, I'm eating lunch, and I still see him moving around in sort of a spooked state for 15, 20 minutes. And he's not going to feed during that. My recommendation is if you spook a hole, you move on. But, maybe for health issues and stuff, there are certainly times where people should post up and just wait and kind of take it slow and try to get that fish. So,
yeah, I agree with that for the most part. The question for the exact wording here, if I can, there it is. If you cast to a spot and you get a take but don't make contact on the set, how long should you wait before casting to the same spot? I agree. If you spook a hole, just move on. Blow the hole, walk through the hole, just move to the next spot. As far as casting goes, it was early August. I was on a trip into the Uintas, and I cast into a spot and fishing a purple haze at Nathan and Peyton Skidmore's recommendation.
That's the only fly there is.
I was fishing a purple haze. I flipped out. I missed a take and didn't make even remotely close to contact with the fish. So I flipped right back into the same hole and got the fish on the next cast.
Yeah.
I mean, if you miss a take and don't make contact, I feel like it's a little bit different than blowing up a hole, just because you might get him on the next take. He might freak out because that fly just ripped out of the water from right next to him. You never know.
Yeah, you never know. And it's like, so I had misunderstood that question a bit now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, as far as like, okay, even if you made contact, a lot of that depends on the species you're fishing too.
Mm-hmm.
If you're fishing browns or cutthroat, the chances that you're going to get that fish to hit again, in my experience, are minimal. Browns almost zero. Cutties slightly higher than zero. Rainbows, it might be about 50%. They often will go for a second hit. Brook trout, I've been in the Uintas where I had a fish on 3 times. Like, I don't know why that hook wasn't setting, but I mean, he was fighting 3 separate times. 4th time I got him into the net. And he just kept spitting the hook. And brook trout, I've found, will almost always go multiple times. They kind of are they're more aggressive. I don't think they really care too much about the fact that it wasn't food the first time. They're kind of like, oh, maybe it's going to be. I don't know. And so
I feel like part of the problem with brook trout is there's just so many of them crammed into small spaces that they don't even care if it's not food or not. They're like, it looks like food, I need to eat.
Exactly. Yeah, they're aggressive. Yeah, exactly. And I think they just so do I think if you make contact, should you just sit? No. If you're sight fishing a cutthroat and you make contact, sure, try to throw again. Your chances are probably pretty low, but the beautiful thing about Tenkara is that cast is going to take you 20 seconds to put it back right where it was.
Mm-hmm.
And if he doesn't hit on the next cast, move on. So that would be one where I'd tell people not to overthink, but to just know the species and kind of know, like, what are my chances? I'm not a fish biologist. This is just thousands and thousands of species of fish caught that it's your cutthroats and browns will almost never hit a second time.
All right. So the next question, when do you use nymphs? Do you need more tippet with nymphs? And are you constantly changing flies on an outing?
This might be one that I'm going to refer to you. I'll give my take. So if you're with a guide and he's constantly changing flies, understand that you're probably not catching fish that day. Would be my take. Not to say you won't. There are definitely times where a little bit of exploring and experimenting is needed. I fish 2 flies, pretty much. I fish a purple haze from April to November, and I fish a Rainbow Warrior from Rainbow Warrior. I'll kind of fish year round. For the most part, kind of April to November, I'm only dry. But there are definitely times where, you're fishing for 30, 40 minutes, you haven't had a hit, haven't seen any rises. Okay, I'll switch to the Rainbow Warrior. But I really find, you can look at Tenkara Addict. He fishes a Utah killer bug every time. And every now and then he'll switch, but I primarily see his videos Utah killer bug.
Killer bug or the killer kabari.
Killer kabari, yeah, some variation.
But even the flies that are a little bit different, they're that same body configuration, just a different color yarn.
Exactly. And so there's not a ton of, presentation is always going to be your best chance over matching the hatch, in my opinion. And that's what we go back to simplicity. That's what the Japanese did. They didn't have the ability to tie to match a hatch. And they didn't necessarily want to. Because they would have their fly that they knew worked and they fished it. For me, that's the purple haze. I think I've had maybe 2 outings in the past 3 years where I haven't even had a hit. For the most part, I get at least a hit, and typically at least one fish landed every day on those 2 flies. And it's presentation. As far as tippet length, again, I say plus or minus 2 feet, so that's going to be sort of a limitation of Tenkara. If you're trying to fish a hole that's 8 feet deep and you're going to need 10 feet of tippet to get it on the bottom and drag it across, you got a limitation there. It's not going to work as well as maybe Euro nymphing. But 3 feet, 2 to 3 feet for me is typically, I don't really measure. I just kind of go like that. Just okay, looks good enough. Clip it, cut it. It's typically enough to drag it on the bottom, and in most streams in Utah, you're only a foot or 2 feet deep anyway. So, yeah, that's my take. I don't know. What do you? Yeah, I know you fish a little different. You match a hatch a little more than I do.
Yeah, I'm one of the guys, I've got my go-to flies for everywhere I fish. If I'm fishing and those flies are not working, which, it happens sometimes, like you said, I'm right there with you on the fact that I think I've been out maybe twice in the past 3 years and not caught a fish. I just catch fish for the most part.
Yeah. It usually happens once you know how to fish, it just kind of happens. You might not have a killer day. You're not always going to get a 100 fish day. I've only had probably 2 of those in my life. And they're amazing.
They are.
You're not always going to get a 50 fish day, but to get a fish is, I think, for me and you and a lot of us who, we do it a lot, sort of the norm, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, like I said, I've got those go-to flies. I do have a few flies where it's like, okay, well, this fly is not working. I'm going to switch to this. I've got, as far as nymphs go, I've said it before on my podcast, the blowtorch is my nymph of if nothing is working, I'm throwing a blowtorch, and I've yet to not catch a fish on that fly.
It just works.
Yeah.
I'll have to try the
never
blowtorch.
does.
I think I've ever fished one.
Have you seen them? They're like a green bodied, they've got a little bit of a soft tackle on them and then a bright orange tail on them. Like fluorescent
I
orange.
don't think I've seen it. I guess it's kind of like power bait. It sort of looks, your power baits come in all different colors, really bright, kind of refractors. And one thing I want to add too, and I'm going to get some hate from Kelly Walker. Dry droppers, don't ever do it. Like, I mean, you can if that's what you love doing. But again, we're talking simplicity. And so, someone had a good point on Utah fly fishing the other day. There was someone asking about a dry dropper for the Provo. Does it work? Yes. Are you going to catch fish on it? Yes. But where you want to put that dry, say like on a seam up underneath a bank or next to the bank, for you to land that dry where you want, your dropper is going to be in the bushes.
Mm-hmm.
For you to land the dropper where you want, the dry is going to be not where you want it. And so at that point, why are you doing it? You know what I mean? I personally think it just adds complication to a setup. I get that question. It just popped in my head, but I get that question probably once a week about dry droppers. I don't do it. I don't think really anyone needs to do it. If you love doing it, keep doing it. But there are better options out there, and that's to just fish a fly that you know is going to work, and to find that fly that you love and present it well. Find that dry that you love and present it well. Find that nymph you love, present it well, rather than trying to like kill two birds with one stone. Just, in my opinion, never works out as much.
Yeah, I'm on the opposite side on that. I'm with Kelly on it. I mean, we talked about it a little bit when we went out. I fish dry droppers in the spring and in the fall, and generally the reason I like fishing stimulator flies as far as my dry flies. When we went out, I started out with a red humpy, switched over to a royal wolf after my red humpy got chewed up. When I fish something like that that's got a little bit more buoyancy to it in the spring, I'll throw a zebra midge or something down under it, something small. And it's crazy just having that second option. Like I've caught two fish at the same time before, which is something completely crazy, but people do it. And it's a different experience for sure, but you're right 100% when you say if you're trying to put your dry fly in that seam, you're probably not going to get it there unless your nymph goes where you don't want it to.
Exactly. And I know I'd get hate, but I just had to say it because if anyone asks now, I'll just refer them to the podcast and be like, well, you now know my opinion on it. That's my opinion. Said at the beginning, these answers are mine. There are a million ways to do anything in life, and fishing is no different. Tenkara fishing is no different than that. I'll just reiterate, getting on the water is what's important. So if you do like fishing dry droppers, you want to try it, give it a try. See if you like it or not. You might love it. I personally don't. But anyway.
Not every style of fishing is for everyone.
Indeed.
All right, moving on. When fishing in streams and rivers, what are you looking for as far as where you are casting? We know exactly.
Yeah, we talked about this. This question came from the Utah Tenkara page. I'm going to throw some shade to Peyton. Not shade, but it was a good conversation. I actually really enjoyed reading that topic. I will stick to my guns. But I also know the people who are posting on it. I know that they also catch a lot of fish. So for me to say, like, I'm right, they're wrong, I don't think is the case. What I will say is, where am I looking to fish? Seams. Fast water meets slow. We know trout, we know trout, not fish. Trout feed at 3 miles per hour, which is about as fast as you can walk, which is about where bubbles form. Foam is home, right? If you're fishing that dirty kind of eddy with sticks floating in it, are you going to catch a fish? Yeah, sure. Chances are great. Are you going to catch as many fish as if you just fish right next to where that current's flowing into the eddy? I think if you're fishing where it's flowing in on that seam, you're going to catch more. So seams are important. Foam is important. What do fish need? We know they need cover, concealment. Those are some military terms. Cover in the Army provides protection from bullets. In the fish world would provide protection from birds and other prey. Concealment would be more of what hides you, right? In this case, is the fish going to be floating right above like a bright green, or an orange construction sign that's fallen off and is sitting at the bottom of the river? Probably not, because they're going to stand out quite a bit. They're going to be more, on that dirt. They're going to be in the shade where they're kind of hidden a little bit from the birds overhead. That's the concealment aspect. The other thing too is, and this is where I kind of disagree, and this is where I say you find fish, and I always say it's in front of a rock. This is an age-old argument. There was a YouTube video I was on where I demonstrated why my belief is that. First, I'll say my belief is that because I've caught probably 2,000 fish in the last 2.5 years in front of rocks. And I don't think that's a fish tell. I catch a lot of fish. But the reason for that is that fish can see about 16 feet if you have clear water. It's one of their biggest attributes is their sight. And so if they were behind a rock, obviously they're going to be facing up current. People say upstream, and I say no, it's up current. Because the other day I was fishing, I got to a stream and I was about to step in, and I actually looked down. This is one of the few times I've fished downstream. There was an eddy flowing back up, and the fish was facing downriver, but upstream. So I casted right in the eddy, let my fly drift towards me, upriver, bam, fish on, But 99% of the time, upstream is also up current. And so they're going to be facing upstream. If there's a rock in their way, they're limiting their best trait, which is their eyesight, and kind of sacrificing it to see food. And so what I challenge people to do is go to a river. On it, let's say there's a day where you've already caught like 5-6 fish, it's hitting. Put your rod away, just walk and spook. Honestly, just walk a river and with the intent of spooking and watching for every fish you spook. And every time you spook one, watch where he was and go and feel with your hand. And often there will be some feature, typically a rock, that fish is in front of. It might not be a boulder, it might just be something like this. But in front of that feature, it's always eroded a bit. And there's a little place for them to kind of tuck their bodies up against it. They're a little bit concealed and they have some cover. They're able to face upstream. And they're also in a place where it doesn't take as much work for them to hang out. And then, usually if there's a boulder or rock, you have two seams kind of flowing around that, and you fish on either side of the stream. You'll cast and you'll just see that fish sort of poke his head out of the softer pocket, kind of pillow in front of the rock. Boom. Get it right in that seam. Boom. And almost will immediately, if you actually watch the set, he'll almost immediately dart back to the rock too. Usually you have tension at that point. He doesn't make it that far, but they're going to try to dart back to that. What do you think? Because that was kind of long. I know that's another one I'm going to get flack for because it's a very controversial topic. I really loved and enjoyed reading the posts that I saw. I disagree with some of the comments on there, but I also know those guys catch a lot of fish. So it maybe their style, maybe they know something I don't. So
I'm more with you on this. I catch fish above rocks more often than below. With that being said, I do catch them below rocks sometimes too. A lot of the times, though, if you're watching as your fly goes down, if it drifts past the rock as it comes around one side or the other, the strike is going to come on the side of the rock. And so a lot of people are, I think, confusing that as I'm getting a hit from below the rock, where that fish was underneath the top of it. and he just comes around and hits a little bit lower, so it looks like he's actually below the rock.
I hadn't thought of that. So what you're saying is it looks like people might be saying, hey, they're thinking that fish is actually swimming upstream to get the fly, whereas what you and I believe and what I see is that they're actually, like you said, they come down. They might even go below the rock to
100%.
grab that fly. Yeah. But they came from above. That makes a lot of sense why there might be that debate, is that people are saying, hey, the hit was below the rock.
Yeah. So like the time that I would say like I catch below the rock, like in this stream right here below me, this spot right where my finger's going in and out, right here. Like there's this little pocket right here. I know for a fact on this particular stream, because I've fished this stream more times than most people would care to count or admit that they fished a stream. I know that right above that, there is not a spot for a fish to bed down, but right below that, I've caught fish. And so there are times where, yes, those fish are going to be sitting below the rock. The difference with this spot, though, and most cases when we're talking about fishing below or above the rock, is the water drops down into that pool underneath it. And so there's not really that chance for them to go around or have that opportunity to be in one spot and have the appearance of fishing it in a different.
No, that makes total sense. Yeah, I don't know why I've been looking at your picture for 40 minutes and I didn't realize that you had a picture of a stream behind you. But yeah, like that pool just off I think it's your right shoulder.
Yeah.
You'd have those two seams, and so where I would cast and probably expect where I'd say behind is that big boulder to the right, but I would put it right to the very looker's left of that seam, kind of between the dropper and that boulder. And I'd expect the hit to be somewhere you have that white water and then you follow it down and then you can see a black kind of rock right in there. I'd expect my hit probably right there on that black rock in front of it. And then obviously if I cast it off to the right, we have a lot of cover and concealment and you could get a hit anywhere in there. And I think that would make sense. But
absolutely, yeah. This whole stream behind me, I mean, over on the left side, it's a little bit faster moving water, like you said earlier, about 3 miles an hour is what you're wanting. But this whole pool, there's seams all over through there that are just phenomenal places to look. And really, if you have the question of where you need to cast, like Nathan said, go out and just walk up a stream. That same day that I flipped up into one spot, missed the fish, and then immediately caught him on the next cast. I had been walking that stream. I fished the stream for about 40 minutes, hadn't seen a single fish. And so I got to the point where I just started making as much noise walking up the stream, not even fishing, just looking for something. And once I got to the point where I saw a couple fish, that's when I started fishing again, because it was like, okay, I covered, half a mile of stream and didn't see a single thing. Now I'm seeing fish. I know where to look already, but now I know where I'm going.
Yeah, and that's a very valid, people say, some days are bad days. One of my big beliefs, and this doesn't come from a standpoint of biological study, it comes purely from just fishing, is if you're not spooking fish, you're probably not catching fish. And the reason is when you're spooking, it's because they're out feeding. And they see you, they hear you, whatever, boom, they're off, they're darted, they're done. When they're not feeding, they're tucked up underneath those boulders to your left, you might have 10 fish. There's probably an undercut in there where 10 of them are just, inches apart. They're just sitting, they're like, for whatever reason, I'm not feeding today, whether that's a change in atmospheric pressure, whether it's the river was blown out the day before and they're still kind of recovering from it being blown out, or maybe there was a great hatch an hour before and they're all like, I'm full. But as you said, you didn't see them, you weren't catching. You got to where you saw fish, you started catching. Does that mean that if you're out fishing, you're not spooking, you shouldn't fish? No. Practice makes perfect. Fish. You might not catch a fish. But I think for a lot of us here, catching the fish isn't the goal. Fishing is the goal. And I may be wrong. I don't want to speak for the listeners. if you're out fishing, you're getting better. You know, netting a fish, setting and netting a fish is like, quite frankly, the easiest thing there is to do. Working on your cast, working on your placement, working on your drift, working on just how to walk a river. Walking a river is tough. Those are the things that I think are the hard parts. You know, yeah, sure. Does netting take practice? Yeah. Have I lost big fish for clients because my netting skill was horrible one time? Yes, and it was embarrassing. And I was like, whew, never letting that happen again.
Gonna go practice netting some fish.
Yep, indeed. But you know, just getting out, like, I think a lot of people, these podcasts and YouTube videos are great, and I love them. I love watching and listening because you learn a lot. But I think a lot of people take that and, you know, they might be listening to us and they might get to the river and even replay it and go, okay, what did Nathan and Brendan say? Don't do that. Just listen to us. Listen a second time. Get Brendan some great views and whatnot. But when you get to the river, just do it. And when you get out there and do it, you're going to learn so much more. You're going to see, yeah, hey, I'm casting off to Brendan's left shoulder in that faster water, and there's nothing. But I see that pocket up there with a nice seam flowing in, and oh, actually, there's a rock right in front where it drops off and gets fast again. Oh, I got a hit right there. I'm going to do that for the next pocket that looks similar. Oh, I got a hit there too. Wow, now I know kind of where to cast more. Let me work on my casting placement. So instead of it taking me 5 casts to get a good drift, I can do it in 1 or 2 casts for a good drift. Or, you know, the other thing I'd tell people is, like, don't post up. If you were fishing anywhere we can see in this, like, this whole section that we can see in the picture. Okay, not the whole section. Up to where it starts to turn. Sorry, your head was in the way. Up to where Brendan's head is, right about there. Would take me no more than maybe 10 minutes maximum. That's if I was catching fish, 10 minutes. Because I would put 4 to 5 casts in the pool off to your right, 2 casts in the pool off to your left, 2 casts up above. I'd move up 10 feet, 2 to 3 more casts. And that's where the practice on making sure if you get 3 good natural drifts and you don't get a hit, you're probably not getting a hit in that seam. That's my opinion. And doing it 20 times isn't going to change the fact that the fish isn't biting. He might not even be there, you know. So yeah, that's I don't know. What do you think? How many casts do you give in a drift?
I like working my rivers or streams in kind of a grid. And so I'm going to come up, before I get to the point where this picture was taken even, back behind, I'm going to put a couple casts right in the front little section of this pocket right here.
Yep.
I'm going to drift it through there 2 times over on the right side, 2 times over on the left side, maybe once down the middle. I'm going to take a couple steps forward. I'm going to work up a little bit higher doing the same thing, and I'm going to work this entire little pocket. But when you and I were fishing together, we fish very similarly. And we're going to cast a few times and we're going to move up. I don't like beating the heck out of one spot. Like you said, if you get a couple good drifts through a spot and you don't get a hit, you're probably not going to get a hit in that spot, and you're better off just to move on. When you and I were fishing that little stream, I think the longest we spent in one spot was maybe 4 minutes, and it was a deeper hole where I fished on one side and then you fished on the other, and then we swapped sides and we both ran our flies through the other side. And like I said, that was maybe 4 minutes that we were spent in that spot, and then we moved on. But for the most part, I'm not the person outside of I've talked on this podcast about it before, and I told you about it as well. My dad and I stood in one spot and caught 100 fish. Like, that's a rare occurrence. It happens.
Yeah,
And if you're catching fish like that, by all means, stand in one spot and fish all day.
Yeah, have a grand old time. You're exactly right. But you're getting hits, and that's the difference. It's, I think, when I saw one on a Facebook post maybe 2 years ago, and a guy's like, I have this, I can't figure out what's wrong. I get to a hole or pocket or seam, whatever, and I usually catch a fish or get a hit within the first few minutes, and then I don't get a hit for another hour. And so I chimed in, I was like, are you staying at the same pocket for an hour? And he's like, yeah. And I said, well, I'm not telling you you're doing it wrong, because I don't actually believe there's a right and a wrong way, despite some of my opinions that I've shared so far. I think there are plenty of ways to fish right and have fun. But I said, why don't you, when you get that hit or get that fish, try it for a little bit more and then move to a different one and see what happens. And he wrote back and he said, oh, I caught fish all day. And it's because, yeah, he had either caught the 2 or 3 fish that were hungry in that hole, or he had spooked out the hole with his first fish on, and nothing else was going to take. I think that will help a lot of people. You just got to move. You got to explore. You got to figure out the river. Provo is a totally different river. Provo, you post up. You post up and you combat fish on the Provo frequently, which I don't fish the Provo. But most of the streams in Utah, get in and move. Find a river that has a trail next to it. Walk the river until your time is up. Hop out, walk back on the trail. Get to your truck, and my guess is you probably would have at least seen, gotten hits, or caught fish.
So, yeah, 100% agree with that. All right, on to the next question. We're going to skip down a couple. We talked about flies a little bit earlier. What is your go-to flies and why?
Yeah, so we talked about it. Purple haze, purple parachute Adams. It's the only fly I use for dries. Why? Number one, it just works. People say, well, what about the gray or the green or purple works? I don't exactly know why it is. One of my beliefs is, and we talked about this on the river, you taught me this, is that the black, when you're actually looking at it from above, doesn't, like, the purple kind of looks more black. Is that what you're, yeah. And whereas the black almost skips past the fish, I don't know, the purple works. The other thing too is the purple parachute Adams, like a lot of dries, but it has a nice indicator on it. You can even do a pink, you can do a purple haze with a pink indicator. And that's going to work just as well, because the fish isn't seeing that pink. They're just seeing the purple underneath. As far as size, people will talk, oh, the fish are hitting a size 18 dry. Can you see an 18 dry? I can't. I fish a lot.
If I squint, maybe.
Yeah, if I squint. If I cast into a place that's totally calm and I know there aren't fish, I can see it. But if I'm casting on a seam, my ability to see that fly is almost zero. And I got decent eyesight with contacts. Fish a lot, so it's not just, having to get used to watching a fly in a river. It's so small you can't see it. So what do I fish? I fish a 12 or a 14. Maybe a 16 maximum on a dry. Because I can see it. If you can't see it, you can't detect the hit. I mean, you could feel it, but you're, the best fishermen are already missing something like 70% of hits is what a lot of data shows. Now, I think that's mostly nymphing. Your dries, you're obviously seeing those hits, still miss a few. And so if you're already set up to fail, why try to fail more by wanting to use a smaller fly? Nymph's totally opposite. You're watching an indicator, or you have a colored line that's acting as your indicator with Tenkara. You're going to see that hit. So you're not watching a size 22, you're watching a closer to like a size 12 if you have an indicator on. It's pretty easy, and it's nice and bright colored, oranges or pinks or whatever. I guess the why, how do I choose, or why do I choose? I'm not an entomologist. I don't tie flies. I love to fish. I don't reload when I hunt. I think that studying the science behind bugs and tying flies are two totally different hobbies, and two pretty awesome hobbies for a lot of people that coincide with their hobby of Tenkara. For me, that's just not what I do or who I am. I don't throw hoppers during hopper season. Purple parachute just seems to work. I have a box of hoppers that's probably 3 years old that I bought one time, and I was like, oh, we're gonna hopper fish, and I did it. Caught some fish, had a grand old time, but I love the flies I use, and so that's kind of how I pick them. But purple haze,
Purple haze and rainbow warriors.
yep, basically. Sometimes the Utah killer bug. Utah killer bug does really well. I mean, your scud. When I say rainbow warrior, I'm gonna give a broader definition. Gray, shiny scud. So your rainbow warrior kind of falls into that on this sort of, if we were to put it in like politics, rainbow warrior might be like the liberal side of the gray scud, and just like a gray scud is going to be the most conservative side, and then anywhere in there. So if I'm fishing a Utah killer bug, it has a little bit of that red shiny metal wrap on it. That's kind of the moderate end of the spectrum, but really like a great looking scud. I don't really fish zebra midges ever. They do well.
I fish them during the winter.
Yeah, they do well. I mean, that's and a lot of people listening, they're like, well, I fish a flashback pheasant tail every day, and I catch fish. Great. That means you're presenting that flashback well, and it works for you. And there's probably no need to try to switch. If you're not catching fish, I would say just pick one of the 2 or 3 flies that I recommend and you recommend, and just fish those all the time and get good at those, and then start to figure out how to fish different flies.
Yeah, so my fly box, as far as like what's always in it, I mean, I mentioned Royal Wolf and the red humpies, blowtorch I've talked about as well, zebra midges I've always got in my box. And then the only other dry fly that is always in my box is an elk hair caddis.
Mm-hmm.
Those fish really well dry. If they get wet, they still fish really well.
Yeah, they're great flies. So.
Yeah. And then the only other wet fly that I do always have in my box is a rainbow warrior as well. I fish pheasant tails on occasion. But for the most part, those 6 flies are going to be what I rotate between. With the purple haze, I guess I do carry some purple haze now because I had enough people twisting my arm about it, and I've started catching fish with it.
Well, yeah, every time you call me, you say, hey, Nathan, you should fish this fly on this river. And I say, well, I appreciate the input, Brennan, but I'm going to fish a purple haze. Like, I'm sorry, dude. I appreciate it. I'm not shooting you down. I'm just saying, I actually take a Zyn 10. I have a bad habit of putting nicotine in my mouth. And I just fill it with purple haze. Like, I buy the box of 24 or 50, just shove them in there, and then I don't even put them in a fly box. I just have this.
Hey, whatever gets it done.
You just got to remember not to grab the fly versus the Zyn when you're putting it in your mouth, but I guess that's not too hard.
Yeah, if you grab a handful of flies, you'll realize pretty quick that you did something wrong.
Indeed.
All right. And then going back to, do you tie your own flies? You mentioned that that's not something you do. I do tie my own flies on occasion. When I tie my own flies, it's the flies that I can save money by tying, being zebra midges. I do have a couple kabari that I tie. Other than that, like humpies, purple haze, elk hair caddis, by the time I buy the materials required to tie those and take the time to tie those, because they're more complicated flies to tie, I'm not saving any money, and it's not worth my time to sit down and try to tie those. Is it worth the investment? If I'm just tying zebra midges and things like that, yes, you're going to save money. It's monetarily at that point, yeah, it would be long-term worth the investment. But most people, the attraction to tying flies isn't saving money.
Yeah, you're not saving money.
It's another hobby that ties into a hobby you already have. And for a lot of people, it's relaxing. I'll turn on the TV, sit down on the couch with a little tray in front of me, and I'll start tying some zebra midges or something. It's just a relaxing time for me. But I
Mhm.
don't do it for the most part because it's going to save me money. Because, like I said, with most flies, you're not going to save money by tying flies.
Oh, absolutely. I know you're going to have listeners. I'm lucky. I live 7 minutes from my favorite river. In an hour drive, I can fish like 20 more streams that I love to fish. Um, and so I can always be fishing. But you're gonna have people who live like in LA, and you know, they get one trip, one weekend a month to go up to the Sierra Nevada or whatnot and fish. And so they're gonna love that weekend, and that's great. That's awesome. And kind of a way to fulfill the fishing bug is to tie the flies while they're not able to. Totally great thing. I mean, maybe one day when my body's broken and I can't walk the rivers like I do, I'll start tying. There's probably a really good chance I will. Just not in the cards for me right now.
All right. A lot of these questions that we've got on here, we've kind of picked and choose as we've been going through as well. One of the ones that we haven't hit yet. Any advice on finding small streams to fish?
Yeah, that's great. Actually, I was hoping you were going to ask that one we were skipping through. I was going to bring it up if you didn't ask that one. Uh, Fish anywhere. So if we're in the West, Utah, Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, most of your if it's a perennial stream, so perennial for those who don't know means that it flows year round, and then you have annual streams that flow during runoff and rainstorms. If it's a perennial stream, it has like a 90% chance, that's like conservative, of
Mm-hmm.
holding fish. um, it's probably holding fish. So anytime you see a stream running, and you're decently sure that stream runs all year long, I would fish it. What I would also do is if you are trying to research, Google, I will tell you, scroll down 10 links, because your first 10 are going to be Fish Brains and these other websites that just suck. Fish Brains will give a fishing trip report for a stream that I know no one has been to in probably 50 years but me, because it takes 10 miles of walking to get to, right? Like, there's no way that someone gave a trip report. So anything you find on Fish Brains, unless it's like how are the cutthroat hitting on Flaming Gorge, is probably either not accurate or certainly should be taken with a grain of salt. Where I would get into is the forums. You'll see, for instance, you'll see a lot of like hunting forums where someone goes, "Hey, I'm gonna be up in the um, Raft Rivers. I saw there's some streams. I'm gonna fish up there." And you'll get someone who's like, "I remember 50 years ago, my dad would take me, and we would always throw a worm and catch a fish while after we got our deer." Okay, great indicator. You now know there are fish. The other thing too is, don't try to put too much focus onto, will it be good fishing or are there big fish or whatnot. My wife lives in Virginia for her job, and so I kind of commute back and forth to Virginia. And there's this creek called 3 Mile Run Creek or 4 Mile Run Creek. Can't remember. Anyway, I was looking at it and people are like, "Oh, I don't know why you'd ever fish it. It's probably disgusting." And I definitely did shower afterwards. I didn't feel gross. The water was pretty clear. I probably wouldn't go in within a day or two of a big rainstorm where it washed all the sewer and gutter materials into the river. But I was catching. There weren't trout. It's a warm creek. But I was catching like 8-inch bluegill all day, and they were fishing like a trout would fish. They were posted up in the seams. They were in front of rocks. They were exactly the way I would fish trout. I was using at that point, just that, I guess I was using a zebra bench, something nice and shiny. Um, and I was catching them all day, and it was a grand old time. And I went into a fly shop, and they're like, "Oh, you need to drive to the Shenandoah She's like a 2.5 hour drive. And I said, well, have you ever fished 4 mile run? Oh, why would you do that? I'll tell you, I had a blast. And I rode my bike, put my rod on my bike. I'd park it, lock it up, fish, 20, 30 minutes, walk back to the bike, ride up, fish. And so when people are wondering what type of research, I'm probably never going to give you my secrets on what small stream I fish, but I will tell you any small stream in Utah pretty much holds fish. And if you get out, you're going to have fun. So,
well, I've got 2 more questions that I want to make sure that we hit on.
perfect.
The first one is, what happens when a section gets stuck when collapsing a rod?
Yeah, it's a good question. So like general rod maintenance, one tip I have, so they're basically try to keep your rod clean. So if you set it in mud, get home and rinse it out. I've had times where I'm backpacking and I set my backpack on the ground and my rod just happened to like scoop up dirt. I lost all my tip plugs. And so there was dirt inside all the sections. I couldn't even open it. So I just unscrewed the butt cap, worked it in the lake quite a bit, kind of swishing it around. Finally, I was able to get some sections out. Eventually, all the sections, wash them off. But sometimes you're going to be fishing. Maybe you had it stuck in a tree and you go to pull that fly out and you just sort of seat those sections too well. And so my tip for that is that basically try your best on the river. But the river is going to be the hardest place to get that fixed because your hands are going to be wet, sweaty, you're tired. It's the end of your day, so you're now kind of rushed. Oh, I got to get back to my truck and get to dinner or whatever. So what I always do is I just collapse everything because usually those 2 that are stuck are going to be the tip section. Sometimes it's others. But I collapse everything that I can collapse, and then whatever section is sticking out, I just take the number 2 section. So the way we, and I think pretty much every rod company do, is handle is always section 1, section 2, 3, so on and so forth. So I take number 2 and I just pull that and extend it all the way up. And then all of those smaller sections are rested now in the thickest, the thickest and strongest part of the rod. And then you can either, wind it up and now you wind it, and instead of just having it all the way collapsed, you're still just winding it on your inline line holder, or you put your tip cap in, and usually the tip cap will fit in that second section. And now you've protected those. And then you just get home and run it under cold or hot water. It will kind of shrink and expand that carbon. And then also if you take some like latex gloves, those give you a little more grip on the carbon. And then you can really work on like popping those sections back in without breaking it. And always remember, worst that happens is you break a section of a rod, you get on your whatever website, whatever rod manufacturer you have, and they're all like 11 to 20 bucks for the most part. That's about.
Unless you're fishing Japanese rods, then you're going to wait 6 weeks for your parts to get here.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah. If you're fishing a Japanese rod, don't take my advice. If you're fishing a rod, learn and experiment. Worst that happens is you're out 12 to 20 bucks and a few days for most manufacturers to get it to you. So.
Perfect. And then the next question is, how do you go about cleaning your rods?
Yeah, so do as I say, not as I do. I don't.
Nathan has horrible habits and doesn't clean any of his rods.
No, I treat mine horribly. Part of that's product testing. I'm able to, I know that I'm not going to say care less, but essentially act as if I care less than any customer I think ever would. And so I break rods pretty frequently. That's also because I try to break them. But the best way to clean it is going to be to really take all those sections out. If you have kind of like a pipe cleaner, or I've even used you can use like a gun bore cleaner, like a 22. Take off the like a bore snake, but cut off the part with the wire brush, and it will clean it pretty well. It will get everything out from those tubes. Soap and water, and then just let it dry. You can use soap on that cork handle too, or foam handle, get it all off. And then a good thing to do is those O-rings. For most of the companies, if you have a zoomable rod, are using O-rings to lock them in place. Kind of inspect them. That is a failure point for every company, just because those O-rings are being friction and pushed in a lot. You can put just like a little teeny bit of oil, like Vaseline or some petroleum product, essentially, just a little bit to help keep those hydrated. You don't want too much where it's sliding in and out, but the friction, that oil will kind of help keep them hydrated, and then put the rod back together and go on your way. As far as like how often to do it, I wouldn't tell anyone to do it every time they go out, or even every 10 times they go out. It's really dependent on what sort of use that rod is getting. Like that backpacking trip, my rod was working perfectly. I got to the lake, I couldn't open my rod. Right away I knew, okay, I have sand in there. If you start to feel, sand, or as you're opening and closing your rod, you'll feel if it's dirty. If it starts to feel dirty, clean it. If it doesn't, I don't think it's something, it's not like a firearm where you go and shoot and you clean. Or you should clean afterwards. It's more kind of by feel, I'd say.
Perfect. Then last thing we got is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel like we should have?
Talked about a lot. I would say really it just comes down to the simplicity and enjoyment. And I'll just repeat that again is, we gave a lot of advice and kind of my opinions and your opinions. And that's really all they are, is opinions. There's no right way to do it. I know, for instance, we have customers who are in their 80s and they can't walk a river. So they go to the Ogden River walk, where the walk will kind of meet the river in a few places. They really can't get far off of it because they're not steady and balanced, and they'll just cast a hole for 2 hours. And that's where they might be changing up flies. They might change flies 10 or 12 times in those 2 hours, because they're the way they have to fish is more of a let's try everything and see, and let's wait for these fish to calm down after they're spooked. But they're out fishing, they're having fun. When we talk about rods, like, yeah, do I wish everyone could afford a rod that's quality built? Sure, that'd be awesome. But the fact is, it's not. And so if you can't afford a $150+ rod, buy the Amazon rod for $20. There's a good chance it will break. I also have one that I've fished probably 20 times and it hasn't broken. I haven't tried to break that rod. I think if I was the way I treat my other rods, I think it would break pretty quickly. But if you're being gentle with your rod, there's a good chance that $20 Amazon rod will last you quite a while, and you're getting out and getting that experience rather than, window shopping and waiting until you have the money. Just getting out and having fun and trying not to overcomplicate it. And then once you get good, have some fun with it. So I said I don't fish furred lines, and that's not entirely true. There are days where I'll be like, I'm going to fish a furred line all day. Or there are days where I say I'm going to fish a Kabari, and I'm only going to work on downstream techniques. And I typically don't catch fish, or catch very few, or I'll do it for an hour and be like, okay, I kind of want to catch a fish. And I'll switch back to what I normally do, catch a fish, and then work back on that technique. But just making it simple, challenging yourself, bring one line, bring one rod, bring one fly, and say, okay, can I catch a fish with this? Part of the simplicity's sake, I don't even take a net typically anymore. And that could be controversial. If I know I'm going to be catching bigger fish, I do, because obviously the wear and tear. But some of those small fish, it's honestly probably quicker and better on the fish to just sort of grab the tippet and hand line it to me, pull it up real quick, out in less than 10 seconds, I can have a fish off the line. There are times where I've actually just cut the hook off the fly, and I've said, okay, I'm catching a lot of fish. I'm fishing for hits now. And I'm just working on getting hits, and I don't want to deal with bringing the fish in. And so just try to make it simple. You don't need, a chest pack that's this big with your net and the multiple rod carriers. And I know one thing you had talked about, and that was one of the questions, is water. So to make it even more simple, I don't even bring water anymore. I just bring life straw. It's as simple as can be. I get out on the river, I'm thirsty, I put the life straw in the water, I drink. Now there are sometimes I do. If I'm going in 6-7 miles on a hike to a river, sure, I'm going to bring some water. But that would be my advice, and all I have is don't overthink it for the people listening, and get out. Because if you're not out, you're not catching. If you're sitting on the river thinking about how long your tippet should be, you're not catching. You're only catching when your fly's in the water. And no matter how poor of decisions you make leading up to that catch, if your fly's in the water, there's a good chance you're going to get hit that day, no matter what you're using. I mean, that'd be my advice.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Nathan, for coming on. And so last minute, I appreciate you bailing me out this week.
Oh, my pleasure.
For those of you that are listening, we are still looking for people to fill in on episodes of the 50 States of Tenkara series that we've got going on. We've still got a lot of states to hit before we've got it finished, but look forward to hearing from you guys on who you think would be a good fit, or if you think you'd be a good fit, reach out. You can reach me online at Let's Talk Tenkara on Instagram, or shoot me an email at letstalktenkara@gmail.com. Nathan, what is your Instagram handle?
Wasatch Tenkara.
All right, perfect. You can follow Nathan at Wasatch Tenkara on Instagram as well. Feel free to shoot him over any messages. I know he's very responsive in getting back to people, and he's more than happy to answer any questions you've got.
Absolutely.
If you do have interest in a Wasatch Tenkara rod or looking at their products, the link will be in the description of the video or podcast episode below, and you can use code SL10Kara at checkout to save 15% on your order.
Perfect. I totally forgot actually that you're one of our affiliates. So for people listening, has nothing to do. There is no sort of whatever nepotism going on. Until you said that, I was like, I don't know if I've given him a code, and then I remembered. So
yeah, no, definitely not there. Like I said previously, I do use Wasatch Tenkara rods a lot. Part of that's because of the warranty. As a guide, it's just too good of a warranty for me to pass up. I do fish a lot of other rods as well. As shown in my previous review video, I've also, since that video, fished 3 new rods that are not Wasatch rods. So a review will be coming out on those, plus a few other rods here in the next few weeks, possibly the next couple months. But look forward to that. And I've got a couple, Nathan mentioned cheap Amazon rods. I've got a couple cheap Amazon rods that'll be on that episode that surprised me pleasantly. So look forward to that. Thank you again, Nathan. And thank you to all you listeners, and tune in next time. This has been the Let's Talk Tenkara podcasts, hosted by Brendan Harden. You can reach us on Instagram at Let's Talk Tenkara. You can also shoot us an email at letstalktenkara@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out with any suggestions for future episodes, or if you or someone you know would like to be featured on the show, or you think they'd be a good fit, shoot us a message and we'll be happy to talk to you. Thank you for tuning in, and tune in next time and Let's Talk Tenkara, a Salt Lake Tenkara production.